it is nice to be able to come back up from the General Assembly and to share with you what is happening, what's going on, and more importantly, and the part that we enjoy most, is opening up the floor for questions and for dialogue to make sure that we are understanding what your concerns are and what kind of feedback you want to provide on the priorities that we have down in the General Assembly. I want to do two things first, and then I'm going to pass the mic over to Chap. First of all, I want to make sure we introduce our elected officials who are here. We all work together as a team. Very proud to have city and county elected officials who are here and can be part of this dialogue. And so I want to again thank Mayor David Meyer for coming out and helping to support us. Let's give him a round of applause. We have our city council members. We have Janice Miller. Janice, where are you at? Janice, thank you. We've got Michael DeMarco. We have John Staley. We have Jennifer Passy. So Lim arrived yet?
Not on our way.
On her way. Okay, but she will be here very soon. We have our Commissioner of Revenue, Paige Johnson. We have our former mayor, Mayor John Mason. And former City Councilwoman Ellie Schmidt. Ellie. And I think we've got everybody. I also want to, you'll notice that we are being recorded today, and so we are very glad to be doing that. I want to particularly recognize Democracy on Air, who is putting this online to make this interactive. And the thing that I love about this is actually being run back there by several George Mason University interns. I'm very proud to have George Mason in my district, and love the fact that they came in and want to go ahead and get this information out to the public. So for the public that is out there who might be watching, welcome. All right, so with that, Chap, I want to go ahead and turn the mic over to you because I know in the last 24 hours there's been a lot of stuff going on down in Richmond. I think Chap is going to start off, and we just want to make sure that we kind of get this out there.
Sure.
Chap, I don't know that I can add too much more than that. Yesterday was an extraordinarily hard day because I've known Governor Northam for a long time and have a huge amount of respect for what he's been able to do, and it is really hard to reconcile that against what we saw back from his college yearbook in 1984. And the simple fact is that it really does just undermine the trust that I think he has built with Virginia. And it's really hard to be able to lead effectively once you've gone ahead and done that. So anyways, I think we'll wait until we see what Governor Northam says with his 9 o'clock press conference. But again, sad day for Virginia, uncharted territory, and we'll see what happens. So anyways, thank you very much for coming out and letting us kind of start off on that note. On to the other part of what we want to do. And so I wanted to give a bit of a brief overview of the General Assembly session. This is a short session this year, and so for those of you who know how the process works, we have 60-day sessions. That's a long session. It doesn't sound all that long, but that's our long session. And then you got 46-day sessions, which is what we're in this year. It is still extraordinarily busy. And so over in the House side, we had a little over 1,200 bills that have been introduced. The Senate, about 800 bills. And so most of those bills will get a hearing someplace, sometime, in some committee or subcommittee somewhere. And so for those of you who come down to Richmond, and we've had a couple of constituents who've done that, you'll see exactly how busy and frantic it can be. But it actually works very well because you come down, make your case for your bills, other people make case for their bills, and you vote up or down on them, and you go ahead and do the people's business and move on.
Can I bring them?
Yeah.
Y'all in the back, if y'all want to sit around in the council seat so we can have theater, please. I don't want to see people standing for the next time. Please, come on down. Grab the building.
There's seats here.
There's seats, please. I want people to be comfortable, okay?
All right, perfect. All right, so we are actually coming up on that dreaded day called crossover. Crossover is when the Senate finishes their work and sends all their bills over to the House, and we do vice versa. So Monday and Tuesday are when all the bills kind of back up and we wind up voting on them. And so literally on Monday and Tuesday, we'll be voting on several hundred bills. We actually start, I think it's at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's oftentimes we don't get out until 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And so that's the day that we kind of all dread. Just so you know, we do tend to specialize in the areas where we are assigned to our committees. And so I'm on the education, the natural resources, and general laws committees. Chap, what are you on?
I'm on courts of justice, education and health, and natural resources, agricultural natural resources.
Great. All right, and so I couldn't go without mentioning that there is some really good news, which is happy birthday to the House of Delegates, formerly known as the House of Burgesses. The Senate was something that we created later. The House of Burgesses actually got its start in July 1619 in that small little church in Jamestown. And so while our understanding of what a representative democracy is has changed dramatically over those last 400 years, this is where it all started. And so this is where that grand experiment in representative democracy first laid that seed, and it's grown into what we have today. And that's pretty exciting, and it's something that we ought to be very proud of as Virginians. And so as you leave, there are brochures that tell you all the different things that we're going to be doing this year to go ahead and commemorate the 400th birthday of the Virginia House of Delegates. I hope that you will take the opportunity to do some of those things. It will be an opportunity of a lifetime.
David, equal billing, this is also the 100th anniversary of the Commissioner of Revenue. You'll get a tax bill.
Thank you, Paige. All the different things that we're going to be doing this year to go ahead and commemorate the 400th birthday of the Virginia House of Delegates. I hope that you will take the opportunity to do some of those things. It will be an opportunity of a lifetime.
David, equal billing, this is also the 100th anniversary of the Commissioner of Revenue. You'll get a tax bill.
Thank you, Paige. You'll be very popular. All right, so Chap and I are going to kind of tag team this, but one of the things that we wanted to do is provide a little bit of a setup for what does the budget this year look like. Because when you think about it, the budget is just simply one big bill, one big piece of legislation where we decide how we are going to spend, what is it, $100 billion approximately over the biennium? Is that about right? Sounds about right. So it's a pretty important bill in terms of what we are doing and what kind of priorities we have as Virginians. A little bit of backdrop, though, in terms of where we are. So we do have steady growth here in Virginia, but we've got some challenges. And so these two graphs, I think, really points that out very clearly. And so you could probably see the squiggly lines, but all you need to really do is understand the squiggly lines. And so Virginia, in terms of our unemployment rate, you'll see that Virginia is the red line underneath. And so you can see that during the Great Recession, we fared better than the rest of the country. And we have a relatively low, unemployment rate. However, that sequestration that happened during that period, people still had jobs, but they were working at lower levels. And so that's what that second chart shows, is when it comes to growth in wages and salaries, we've actually lagged behind the rest of the country. And so we've got low unemployment, but people aren't making as much as they used to. And so that's kind of the dichotomy of, we're still growing, but we've got challenges because we're still trying to catch up with the fact that some of those really good jobs haven't recovered since the Great Recession. The good news for 2018 is that we did have a surplus. So we had about $555 million that we hadn't spent through that biennium. That surplus goes to three things. And so by code, part of it goes to the Water Quality Improvement Fund anytime that you have a surplus. Part of it goes to the Revenue Stabilization Fund. And so this is a special fund that gets socked away and can only be used vis-a-vis the Constitution when we have miscalculated revenue halfway through a budget cycle. And so it's meant to make sure that, again, we're able to stabilize our revenue and that we don't have to lay people off because the revenue forecast is off. The last one is the cash reserve fund, and so this is something we've just been doing over the last couple years. And so this doesn't go to the revenue stabilization fund, but it makes sure that we have enough of a cash cushion so that, again, if things don't work out well, we're able to stabilize that. So this is an example of how that works. And so you can see over time that we have built up the fund. We will have an economic downturn. We'll dip into that fund. We'll build it back up. It'll go back down. But it's one of the reasons why Virginia is able to maintain our AAA bond rating. Because the rating agencies know that if something goes wrong, we're able to dip into that revenue stabilization fund and that we're able to adequately pay off our debts. And that AAA rating is like gold because we're able to borrow at much lower rates than other states, and that saves us a lot of money. So looking ahead with respect to this year, there's really three things that are primarily driving what's happening. And so the first one gets back to those economic considerations. We also have some significant time-sensitive issues and budget pressures. And then the big one is what happened at the federal level with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so I just wanted to briefly touch on each of those. So from the economic considerations, it's looking relatively positive, and so we're looking at about a 3.3% growth rate for this fiscal year, slightly higher in 2020, and that's a result of a relatively strong labor market. We also, though, are seeing a bit of a weak housing market because of interest rates, and so actually the recordation tax is going down. That's still less than what traditional growth rates have been in Virginia, and so Chap can attest that in prior years we've been 5 or 6 percentage points, but we're still going in a positive direction. This means that going into the biennium, we have about $728 million that is going to be increased revenue from that. At the same time, we got some pretty significant budget pressures. And so these are things that appropriations and finance over in the Senate, and actually, Chap, I stole this from the Senate side because it was really, really good, is that these are things that are time-sensitive commitments that we need to fund. And so they are technically discretionary, but it would be very harmful if we didn't step up to the plate to do this. The major one up there is Medicaid. And it has nothing to do with Medicaid expansion whatsoever. This has to do just with our core existing Medicaid program, that the forecast for how much we needed to put into it last year, we underestimated how much we would need, and so we need to be able to backfill that. So again, nothing to do with Medicaid expansion, has everything to do with just simply forecasting the need for basic Medicaid services. And so the bottom line is once you add all those budget pressures up with the additional revenue that we're expecting this year, I think you have about $100 million left, which is good. We're in the black, but it also means that there isn't all that much discretionary funding that we have to play with just looking at budget pressures and economic growth. And before I get into the federal stuff, Chap, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, just keep talking.
All right, so the Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, this has presented a bit of a conundrum for Virginia, because typically the idea of conformity, making sure that what we do conforms with the federal level, is a very mundane exercise that goes through unanimously. Because of the very big changes at the federal level, though, it does affect Virginia in some ways that we need to step back and look at our own tax policy. And so the federal level increased, I think it was about double the standard deductible, reduced or put some caps and limitations on what you could do with respect to your itemized deductions. Virginia law, and I'll explain why this is the way it is, but Virginia law says, hey, if you itemize at the federal level, you got to itemize at the state level. If you do the standard deduction at the federal level, you got to do the standard deduction at the state level. Usually it's the federal consequences of the tax that make you choose itemized versus standardized. And so what's the result of that dynamic? Well, what it means is that people are going to maximize their return, looking at federal and state. But what it ultimately means is about 26% of Virginians will wind up paying more in their state taxes as a result of what happened at the federal level.
Can I just explain for a second?
Yeah.
when you fill out your tax return, you get a number called AGI, Aggregate Gross Income. And you'll do that off your federal return. Now, as a result of what the feds passed in 2017, they took away itemizations. So that AGI number may be higher, but the feds also increased the minimum standard deduction and they lowered the rate. So you would pay less in federal taxes. However, when you take that AGI number and then plug it into your state return, that means you're actually reporting more income on your state return, so you would pay more, marginally more on your state return. I hope I just explained it. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. That was really impressive. All right. So, in terms of what to do next, and this is what the General Assembly is really struggling with. So you've got 26% of Virginians who are paying more in their state income taxes. And so, in trying to think about it, it's important to understand what is the profile of that 26%, because that really ought to drive how you react and respond to that. And so, of that 26%, the plurality, about 40%, are actually making less than $50,000 per year. And so, on average, they're going to be getting a tax increase of about 4%. But of the 26% of Virginians who are paying more, 40% of those individuals make less than $50,000. The next bracket is the $50,000 to $125,000, and so that's 35% of that 26%. And then rounding that off is the 125 to 250,000, and so that's the remainder at 24%. Above that, it's a really small number of individuals that are affected at the state level. And so that's kind of the driver that we're looking at, and that's the debate that we are having in terms of what do we do in response in order to make sure that we are respecting and making whole those individuals that are paying more through that process. And so there's a couple of different options on the table. And honestly, my perspective is it needs to be a mix of approaches. And so the governor had proposed making the earned income tax credit refundable. And so that's something that already happens at the federal level. That is a program that is specifically targeted towards working families making less than $50,000 per year. And so that links up with that 40% who are paying more for those who are paying more state income taxes. The other one is to raise Virginia's standard deduction. And so that hasn't actually been touched since the early 2000s, Chap, I believe. And so every year that we don't raise it, our system actually becomes less progressive. And so the idea of raising that standard minimum deduction at the Virginia level certainly helps those out at the lower levels, but also helps out those at the upper levels as well, again, making the system a little bit more progressive. There has been a proposal to decouple Virginia and the federal government, where you'd be able to do standard deduction at one level and then do itemized at the state level. That could be problematic. That actually takes out a lot more money from Virginia's system. The part that I'm more concerned about is how do you audit that? So we rely on the federal government for those dreaded audits to make sure that the itemizations are indeed what they are. And so if we were to start doing that, the federal government's not going to do that for us. We would actually have to develop sure that we have that audit capacity as well. And then the final thing is, and this is something the governor has proposed as well, is making one-time investments in terms of education, in terms of water quality, in terms of rural broadband development. And the idea here is that, at least for the individual tax components, that in fact those will phase out in the tax year 2025. And so we want to make sure that we're not making such large changes that once 2025 comes out, that we are in big trouble, because now we would have to go ahead and unravel those changes ourselves in order to keep our budget whole. And so those are the things that are up there. I think I could speak for Chap. It's a process with regard to conformity, and we're kind of in the thick of it right now as far as what path we want to move forward with. But I think all of us are very cognizant and committed to the idea that we need to come up with something very soon so that people can move forward with their taxes. All right. We're not going to go into much detail about all these. This is just to get your brains thinking about the range of issues that we're dealing with this year, to prompt you for questions. Redistricting reform has been a big issue this year, something that I know Chap and I believe strongly in. The Senate is taking the lead on, I think, the better of the bills, and so that's going to be coming over to the House for our consideration. The trick is getting that out of subcommittee and committee onto the House floor. ERA, kind of the same thing. The Senate went ahead and passed that, didn't make it through the House subcommittee or committee. Gun safety legislation, a broad number of bills put in on that. The Amazon package, and so a lot of people think that that was a done deal. Actually, the General Assembly has to approve that deal, and so that's been a debate in there. Just one quick statistic that I wanted to throw out, because I know that there's concerns, and I have concerns about affordable housing, I have concerns about transportation, but Amazon is going to put 25,000 workers within Crystal City. Anybody want to venture to guess how many workers we lost out of Crystal City as a result of crack and sequestration? So 32,000. And so one of the things that you have to be cognizant of is we got a lot of empty, unused infrastructure over there in Crystal City that we are simply filling back up and reutilizing. Casinos and sports betting, I'll let Chap talk a blue moon about that. One of the unsung issues this year was on evictions. There was a study that came out last year that showed that there are some cities in Virginia that have among the highest eviction rates in the nation. And so the Housing Commission that I sit on actually stepped back and we're looking at how do we solve this without making it harder for somebody to be able to rent a property, because we understand that balance. And there were actually 7 bills that came out of that study that I think make some really good progress in that area. Clean energy has been a big area of focus this year. Local land use, as I know Mayor Meyer knows, so we've got proffers. I'm not going to explain what a proffer is unless somebody wants to know what a proffer is. But the idea is, what is the right balance between the state and the localities with regard to land use issues? And so there's always kind of that tension. I tend to believe that local city councils and boards of supervisors are in a much better position to make those decisions than we are. Distracted driving and hands-free, a real epidemic in Virginia. So statistically, distracted driving is now up there with drunk driving in terms of the number of deaths per year, and it's probably underreported because it's really hard to be able to prove that somebody was driving distracted or on their cell phone. My understanding, Chap, is that the 2 bills that are coming out of both sides deal with hands-free.
We passed a bill in Senate courts,
yeah,
hands-free.
And then we got the budget, of course, at the end. I think the big part where, at least on the House, there's agreement. I don't know, Chap, on your side, whether there's agreement to increase teacher salaries by another 2% so that they get a 5% raise above what we had, the actions that we took last year. So just wanted to highlight a couple of bills that we've been putting together, and so I'll do mine really quickly. Chap can do his. Early childhood education is something that I've had a chance to focus on this year. If you look at all the research, it's amazing how much development in a brain happens between birth and year 5. And so having a really good early childhood education system is very, very important. The challenge that we've seen is, and anybody who read my last newsletter got to see the chart, is that we are all over the place in terms of how that is organized. And so you got pieces in the Department of Social Services, you got pieces at the local level, the state level, with the Department of Education. And it makes it really hard for any parent to be able to navigate, and especially hard if there was a question and you didn't have any ID, that you had to provide an affidavit, which if you lied was a felony. But that was 32% yes and 60% no with regard to photo ID. Raising the minimum wage, so between $12 and $15 an hour, so 64% in favor. Those who are in favor of a raise, but for less than $12 an hour, 18%. And then the last one with regard to our marijuana laws, and this has been a debate that's been going on for a long time, and each year the dynamics shift a little bit. And so 28% say keep our laws how they are. 71% say decriminalize possession of small amounts, and so it wouldn't be legal but it wouldn't be a criminal offense. It would be subject to some kind of fine or fee. 65% support expanding medical use to all forms of marijuana, and so last year and the year before we allowed for the use of, I don't know, always mispronounces, cannabinoids. Cannabinoids, there we go. And so it's the non-psychoactive part of the marijuana plant that has some really good health benefits. So 65% say expand that. 49% are in favor of expanding for recreational use and regulating it similar to what we do with alcohol with ABC stores. Only 18% say that it ought to be legalized with minimal government oversight. And so with that, that's just a quick recap of where we are, and we are here for the next hour and 10 minutes to answer. Yeah, we have had Republicans, and one actually got up on the House floor to express this in support of the ERA. Just the rules of the House, though, it's very hard to bring something directly up on the House floor if it hasn't gone through subcommittee and committee, and so there's where it's been stuck.
Can't they force, like, Ranson and Cole to tell them to bring it to the floor? So there's...
Yeah, and so that would be a discharge motion.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, isn't there a way to force it to come to the House floor? And so the rules do allow for a discharge motion where you would discharge the committee and bring something up to the full House. I've never seen one of those actually succeed, and it's simply because it's considered a procedural vote, and typically the majority party down there will not vote to go ahead and override that system. It would be really tough to do that.
Yes, sir.
Would passage of the ERA in its current form undermine all the gains made with respect to girls and women's sports teams?
Start with that. Yeah, we have had Republicans, and one actually got up on the House floor to express this in support of the ERA. Just the rules of the House, though, it's very hard to bring something directly up on the House floor if it hasn't gone through subcommittee and committee, and so there's where it's been stuck.
Can't they force, like, Ranson and Cole to tell them to bring it to the floor? So there's...
Yeah, and so that would be a discharge motion.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, isn't there a way to force it to come to the House floor? And so the rules do allow for a discharge motion where you would discharge the committee and bring something up to the full House. I've never seen one of those actually succeed, and it's simply because it's considered a procedural vote, and typically the majority party down there will not vote to go ahead and override that system. It would be really tough to do that.
Yes, sir.
Would passage of the ERA in its current form undermine all the gains made with respect to girls and women's sports teams?
Start with that.
Well,
I can. And so in the same way that the First Amendment right to free speech is a fundamental right, but yet you can't run in here and yell fire, you can't engage in libel and slander, the Supreme Court, has basically said, we're going to look at any restrictions from a strict
Strict scrutiny.
Strict scrutiny. Whether, what is the compelling interest in making sure that compelling interest is done very narrowly. And so that's how the Supreme Court would look at issues like that, which is, what's the issue, how narrowly is it, and that you're only focusing on those things. And so same thing with Second Amendment. And so that would be the new standard, and probably an appropriate standard if you are going to make those distinctions based on gender.
Well, we're going to go here and then kind of work our way. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
you mentioned the crossover day. You have hundreds of bills to review in just a matter of 2 days, I guess. And in the news recently, there was a statement by, I think, one of your members that she didn't have an opportunity to actually review the bill before she agreed to it. So my question is sort of, is that a good process? Can you think of any other process that might be? That's a lot of work to do, and maybe the work's not quality when there's so much to do in that amount of time.
Yeah, and so let me distinguish. I think the bill that you're talking about was the person's own bill.
Repeat the question.
So the question was with crossover, where you've literally got 100, 200 bills that you're going to be voting on a single day. Is that a good system? And Yeah, I've got mixed feelings on that question. You know, for me, you know, you do sit down and you look through the different bills and you see what's on the contested and uncontested calendar, and you do your best to be able to identify issues that you think would be problematic, and how you go ahead and vote on those things. I guess I'm reticent to stretching the session out much more than it is, because I've seen other states that have longer sessions, and they're down there, and once you reach a point, you start actually justifying your own existence for why you're down there. And so you want to make sure that you're going down there, again, doing the people's business. You have your say, and then we got to go home and face the consequences with the voters. It would be nice to be able to slow down that train a little bit. I'm not sure exactly how you go ahead and make that happen, but I know that Chap and I, you know, we take very seriously. We know when crossover's coming. You know, we rely on conversation with colleagues, and we go in there and flag exactly what bills we may or may not be concerned about. Now, the beauty of the system is that we have a Senate and we have a House, and so it's not uncommon where something might slip through the House, and then the Senate takes a look at it, and they'll go ahead and kill those bills, and vice versa. It's never pleasant to do, but that's why we've got the two bodies to be able to provide those checks and balances, and then ultimately you've got the governor who has a big staff who goes through every single one of those. And you know, he's got the opportunity to go ahead and veto or send down amendments to those. And so ultimately, you know, again, you might have a piece of legislation that's problematic that will get through one of those parts. It's very rare when they get through all three parts, and you haven't gone ahead and caught the issue.